thing, as in just find y prime using indirect differentiation. But this time I have 2xy. Okay, this is really small and it's going to sneak past you. But this is actually the product rule. Yeah, because we're multiplying two different letters. So this 2xy, don't let it sneak past you. This is the same thing as 2x is my first chunk of goodies, and y is my second chunk of goodies. It's just that my chunks aren't that fat this time. 2x is super small, y is super small, but don't get tricked. Those are two different letters multiplying together. So we have to use the product rule. And the product rule says the first times the derivative of the second plus the second times the derivative of the first. And that's for finding the derivative of just this 2xy. Eventually we'll do this y plus 6, but for now, let's just do this 2xy. Okay, and let's remember that every time we take the derivative of y, we have to put y prime. So which part of this is taking the derivative of y? Not the first and the second, because I need the d. D, there it is. Okay, and the y is the second term. So when I take the derivative of the second term, I'm gonna make sure I put a y prime. Yeah, I'm not gonna put a y prime when I just write down the second term. Okay, let's go. First, 2x times the derivative of the second. Well, the derivative of y is just 1. But every time I take the derivative of a letter y, I have to put y prime. Darn. Okay, plus the second, which is y, times the derivative of the first. The derivative of the first, 2x, is just 2. And notice that I did not put y prime next to this y I just wrote, because I'm only write down y prime if you took the derivative, if you use one of those rules. This time, it just says second, so I just wrote the second. I didn't take the derivative, so no y prime here. Okay, and then let's clean this up. Let's see, 2x times 1 is 2x, and it's multiplied with a y prime, plus y times 2 is 2y. And then now let's finish the problem. Okay, my arrow's not long enough. Okay, there we go. Okay, now let's finish taking the derivative. The derivative of this naked y, well, I'm taking the derivative of y, so that means I have to put a y prime. So the derivative of y is just 1, but I have to put times y prime, because when you take the derivative of a y, you have to put y prime. Then the derivative of 6 goes away. Then we have equals 0. And the derivative of 0 is 0. And I have to put it here because there's nothing else on the right side of this equals. Okay, so let's clean this up. I think 1 times y prime is just y prime. Yeah, okay. So we have 2x times y prime plus 2y plus y prime equals 0. Okay, we are supposed to be getting y prime alone by itself. Well, in the past couple of examples, every time I wanted y prime alone, I got rid of anything that did not have that. Like this 16x did not have a y prime, so I moved it to the other side. We're going to use that same theory here. If I want y prime by itself, I'm going to move this 2y away because it does not have a y prime in it. I'm not going to move this 2xy prime because it has a y prime in it. So only move away what does not have a y with that little tick mark. Okay, and we get 2x parentheses y prime plus y prime equals negative 2y. Okay, now we're supposed to get y prime alone. Well, I can't divide by 2x because that would cancel this sucker, but I would have to divide this other y prime by 2x. If this just said 2x y prime equals negative 2y, that's when I could divide by 2x. But darn it, I got something else here. So we're going to do that horrible GCF that we hate. We're going to say, hey, since I see y prime twice, I can pluck it out and write it once in front of a parentheses. So I see y prime to the left of a plus sign and to the right of a plus sign. So I'm going to say my GCF is y prime. So I'm going to write y prime, open parentheses. Well, let's see, when I take away this y prime from this first sucker, I get a 2x and a plus sign. And if you want to think backwards, you can say y prime times 2x is 2x y prime. Okay, good. Now, if I take this y prime away from after the plus sign, I have to put something. Well, what's the naked number attached to this y prime? It's a pretend 1. So I'm going to say 1. And that makes sense because if we think backwards, y prime times 1 is y prime. Okay, and then we're equal to negative 2y. Okay, we're almost done. We were supposed to get y prime alone. It's not. But it is multiplying by this big old chunk of junk. Yeah. So to get y prime alone, the opposite of multiplying, that's not an exclamation point, that's a multiply. Multiply by this big chunk of junk is to divide by this chunk of junk. And that cancels. And we get y prime equals negative 2y over 2x plus 1. Holy poop. Yeah, that's a lot of moving parts. Okay, the final thing is plug in this negative 1 and 6. Well, let's remember, negative 1 is x, 6 is y. Let's go. Negative 2 times what's y? Oh, it's 6. All over 2 times what's x? Oh, it's negative 1. Plus 1. And then I think this gives me negative 12 on top and negative 2 plus 1 on bottom. And then that becomes negative 12 on top over negative 1, or just 12, because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Hey, that's my final answer. And that represents the slope of this crazy graph for this crazy equation. So the slope would be 12, or rise up, run 12. Sorry, rise up 12, run 1, rise over 1, run. So this would be rise over run for this graph, this curve at this point. Ooh. Last sucker. Pretty much the same thing, only it has a different letter, so that's why we're doing it. Okay, this last sucker, it has X's and T's, so that's kind of crazy. If we want to get rid of the X's and T's, we can if we want to. If you want to just use X and Y, that's cool. Just make sure you replace everything correctly. So if you want to use X and Y, instead of t and x, that's cool. Just replace every t you see with the letter x and replace every x you see with the letter y. So in the real world, we don't always have x, y. We have different letters. This T might stand for time and X might stand for xylophones. Who knows? Okay, so if I want to change this, I'm going to take the X to the 4 and instead put a Y to the 4. Plus, instead of T, I'm going to use X. X to the 4. Instead of X, I'm going to use a Y. Instead of this T3, I'm going to use X3. 9 is still a minus 9, and we're equal to 0. Okay, now let's use implicit differentiation, where every time we take the derivative of a y, we're going to have to put a y prime. Okay, but hold up. What in the haberdasheries and hemoglobin? We got x to the 4th multiplied multiplied with a y. That's a product rule. That's a first and a second multiplied together. And when we have a product rule, we have to do that formula. So before we even worry about this y4, this x3, this minus 9, let me just deal with this product real quick. The product says the first times the derivative of the second plus the second times the derivative of the first. And remember, every time we take the derivative of this second term, y, I'm going to put a y prime. So when I take the derivative of the second term that has a y in it, that's when I need to write y prime. Oh gosh. Okay. So let's see here. The first term is x to the 4. Multiply. The derivative of the second, well, the derivative of just a letter is 1. But we have to put multiply with y prime, because every time you take the derivative of a y, you have to put y prime. Okay, plus the second term, y. No y prime because it did not say derivative of the second term. Times the derivative of the first, x to the 4. Okay, let's clean up. This makes x to the 4 times 1. That's just x to the 4 y prime. Plus this next one says y times x to the 4. That's just x to the 4 y. Okay, now let's bring down the rest of our goodies. The rest of my problem should be this y to the 4. So let's see here. The derivative of y to the 4 is 4y to the 3. But then, because I took the derivative of a y, I have to put y prime. And you can either put a multiply dot, now that we're grown up, or you can put a parentheses. Okay, so we've taken care of this sucker. We've taken care of this product sucker. Let's go to this one. The derivative of x to the 3 is plus 3x squared. And I do not put y prime because I did not take the derivative of y. Okay, then the negative 9 goes to a 0, and I don't have to write it, but I do need to write this equal sign and something on the right. Well, the derivative of a 0 is 0, and I have to write it now because it's the only thing on that right side of the equals. Okay, now we have to solve for y prime. So I'm not going to touch anything with the y prime, but I am going to move everything away that does not have a y prime. Oh, and real quick, this x to the 4 y prime, it was supposed to be positive. Okay, so I'm going to move away everything that does not have a y prime. So goodbye, x to the 4th y, I'm subtracting you. Goodbye, 3x squared, I'm subtracting you. Okay, and we have 4y to the 3 y prime plus x to the 4 y prime equals all this junk on the right. All right, now we need to try and get y prime alone. Well, dig, dack, nabbit. Okay, if I want to try and get y prime alone, darn, it's on two different things right now. I cannot just divide it off because then it'll be on the bottom and I need it on the top, big and normal. So we're going to do that thing that we hate, the GCF, where we say, hey, to the left of this plus sign and to the right of this plus sign is a y prime. So we're going to take that out. Okay, well, if I take out the y prime, what do you have left on the left side of this plus sign? I have 4y to the 3. If I take away y prime from the right side of this plus sign, what do I have left? I have plus x to the 4. And that's equal to all this junk on the right. Okay, now, just like on that previous example, this y prime is multiplying. So to get rid of multiplying by all this junk, we're going to divide by this junk. I think I called it the chunk of junk. Yeah, that was what it was. Chunk of junk. Okay. Chunk of junk. Chunk of junk. How many of you are repeating me right now? Chunk of junk. Chunk of junk. Okay, so let's see. We're going to have y prime equals negative x4 y minus 3x squared over 4y to the 3 plus x to the 4. Okay, you might have to type this in your homework, but don't yet because we need to convert it back to the letters we started with, the Texas letters, TX. Okay, before we convert it back to the Texas letters for your homework, let's plug in this point of, instead of TX, now it's XY. So let's plug in negative 2 for X and 1 for Y. So negative 2 for X. So first we have a negative, and then open parentheses, we're going to plug in negative 2 for X. So every time we plug in a negative 2, we have to put a parentheses. But on this first sucker, there's already a negative there. So you have to put a negative on the outside. Don't argue with me. Okay, then that negative X is a negative 2 to the 4. Then what did we say my y was? It was 1 minus 3 parentheses negative 2 to the square all over 4 parentheses. We said our y was a 1 cubed plus parentheses negative 2 to the 4th. Okay, I think I'm going to put all the top in at once, then all the bottom in at once, and that'll help me. Okay, so in your calculator, make sure you put an extra negative on the outside of your parentheses from that original negative on the X. Then put a negative in the parentheses for the negative 2 that we started with in our point. Don't argue with me. Okay, so we get negative parentheses, negative 2 parentheses to the 4. Get down back on your line. Get down. Okay, times 1. And then this is a minus sign 3. So the gray minus 3 parentheses negative 2 squared. So the only thing on this top line that was actually a minus was this dash on the 3. And I got negative 28. Now let me do the bottom. We had 4 parentheses, 1 parentheses cubed. Get down. Okay, and then plus 2, nope, plus open parentheses, negative 2 to the 4. And I got 20. Okay, now I'm going to divide those and press math, enter, enter. Negative 7 over 5. Okay, so this is our final answer, negative 7 over 5. And just in case your homework wanted you to write this, what the derivative was, let me change all these letters back to what they were supposed to be. So at the very beginning, we said that the Texas they gave us, TX, was really XY. So now we're going to go backwards. Every time we see a X, we're going to put a T. Every time we see a Y, we're going to put a X. So at the very beginning, I was gonna have a hard time with the X and the T. So I changed it to X and Y. Yeah. And then now we have to change it back because I think your homework wants this with the original letters. Okay, so Y prime. Y is the letter X now. So X prime equals negative X. RX is now T from Texas. So every time we see an X, we're going to put a T for Texas. Okay, so every time we see an X, we wrote a T. Now every time we see a Y, we're going to write an X. So there's a Y in this top left. There's a Y on this bottom left. Okay, so if your homework asks you to type in an actual equation before the number -7/5, type this sucker in. All right, woohoo, that was rough.